Hey guys, it's going to be a little bit different video because I want to share a little bit of our backstory here on our homestead and then what my plans are for the coming year when it comes to regenerative rotational grazing with our livestock. So to get started, I wanted to share a little bit more about how we started planning our homestead back in 2019. So the first thing we did is we printed off an aerial view from Google Maps of our property and we started dreaming. We started designing in different zones. This was when we had started doing a little bit of research on permaculture, but we didn't have a huge knowledge base quite yet. But one thing we did understand was the zones and how important it was to pick your different zones on your property accordingly. Now, if you're new to permaculture, zone 0 is your home and zone 1 is 50 to 100 feet around your house. So this is where you're going to place certain parts of your homestead that you want to access daily. For us, that was the garden. And so we took out a huge patch of grass in front of our home. Now, another key aspect to permaculture is understanding water flow. And this past year, we took a class from our dear friends over at the Schoolhouse Life, and it was all about understanding permaculture on your homestead a little bit more. And so we were given the homework to draw up how water flows on our property, again using an aerial view from Google. And then really, how can we help water flow where we want it to, or how can we save water so that we don't have so much wash off of our property because one part is higher than the other. So that was really important for us. That was us adding in our 2 water totes and gutters to the backside of the house. Now last year, we expanded the garden and we expanded rows further on our property over into part of our pasture. But another part of the regenerative rotational grazing process is actually figuring out how many paddocks we had on our property. Now, since drawing out and calculating out paddocks, we have extended the garden to a point where I did lose a couple of my paddocks for our livestock. So this is a more updated version of what our property looks like and what it will look like this year. Now, the highlighted section around most of the property is going to be the pasture that I will use to rotate our sheep, goats, and chickens. And a key part of the regenerative rotational grazing is making sure that each section of the paddock gets between 90 to 120 days of rest. So this winter, I helped our pasture take a break by putting our sheep and goats in the barn on deep bedding and only rotating our chickens. What this did was allow us to seed some more winter rye over to a different section of our property so that pasture can be ready to go once spring is in full force and we have our last frost date on April 2nd. This section here is the section that I am so excited to move my sheep and goats to here in just a few weeks, hopefully. I know our last frost date is still almost 6 weeks out, so we have just a few more weeks until we can move them out here. But I'm really excited for the growth that will happen within the next 6 weeks for this grass that's already been established. And I just want to say that if you are getting into homesteading and your property does not have the best pasture, it will happen. It will take time, but it'll happen and it'll be wonderful. So this specific section here has had all of our varieties of livestock on it, and because of that we have a much greater diversity of the plants that grow in this section. And then we also reseeded this section with that winter rye. So I'm really, really excited for my sheep and goats to enjoy it. This is some beautiful, lush grass that we have in here amongst a variety of other plants. These are some weeds, some woody weeds that the goats loved. But we are really hoping that this year with rotating, we will have fewer of these thick woody branches, honestly, and have a lot more beautiful pastures. So that was something we really saw last year for the first time ever, was tall, lush grass that was waist high for us on our property. And unfortunately, it gets cold enough that it does die here. So I'm really looking forward to how we can improve our pasture so that next winter it's not as much time on deep bedding in the barn, but definitely out on the pasture sooner or in the barn later in the season. So I placed them in the barn on deep bedding back in December, and so we're hoping that they're able to go back on pasture by May 2nd. But today I am going to be putting down some more seeds on future pasture on a different section, and this will be a mix of rye and oats, just to kind of give them a little bit more substance, to add a little bit more diversity into our pasture. So they are currently on a coastal Bermuda mix hay in the barn, and while it's great for them, it is not the best around our garden. So that manure will eventually only come out and be on this section of the property over by the barn, because we aren't super worried about the Bermuda taking over here. However, we do have a couple bales that we have rolled out, and thankfully those bales are actually orchard hay. So they have really reseeded well. That is what we initially have over here that helped reseed and bring this beautiful grass in here, and all of our animals love it. So I'm super excited to see our pastures this season. But let's go mix some seeds and spread them out. So a question you may be asking is, why do we want to have better pastures? Because my goal here is to have grass-fed, grass-finished lamb, not only for our consumption, but to possibly offer to our community in the future. And in order to do that, I need to make sure that our soil is the best it can be, and then our forage is the best that it can be. So I'm extremely hopeful for our pasture this year. We have seriously come a long way. I'll share some photos in here of what the homestead looked like over the past few years in the summertime when we have waist-high grasses here. So after we took that permaculture class last year, and I really sat down and drew up what each of the paddocks would look like, drawn out from the aerial view of our homestead, we had about 42 paddocks, and that is taking one of our electric net fences and having it connect to itself. So those fences are roughly 600 square feet that the livestock have. And from that class and talking to Drew and Lacey a little bit more, they challenged me and said, well, how much space do you really need that's only going to last them for 3 days? And once you have that 3-day span, move them on to the next paddock. And so the goal there is not having your animal overgraze a section, but then also ensuring that that section gets the proper amount of rest time without the animals being on it grazing. And so it really kind of challenged me to reevaluate how we rotate our animals here. And that kind of jump-started the decision to not have pigs on our homestead anymore. So we have a pair of goats and we have sheep. And the bummer about having sheep and pigs together is you cannot rotate them together because they share the same parasite load. And so we would not be able to successfully rotate our sheep and our pigs in the same area without the need for intervention of non-holistic like worming and need to deworm our animals. And that's something that we strongly wanted to stay away from because we want to raise our animals holistically. We want to be as much hands-off as possible while also ensuring that our animals are healthy. So, and with that decision of not having pigs on our homestead anymore, that's where we butchered our final pigs and we added more sheep. And so now I have 5 sheep and 2 goats, and hopefully we'll have a couple goat kids later this spring. Our 1 ewe sheep is due here in the middle of March. I'm so excited. She's already starting to bag up and I can hardly wait to have a little lamb here on the homestead. But so we've really reduced the amount of larger animals that we have on our homestead. At one point we had 6 kune pigs and 13 goats and a lot more chickens than we have now, as well as turkeys, and then we still had the rabbits. And so we had a lot of animals on our small property. And so taking that class really challenged me and kind of had me reevaluate what animals were actually important to us here on the homestead and what animals I wanted to keep and kind of really learn to master. So, you know, there's that saying of like, it takes 10,000 hours to master something. Well, I would love to master being a shepherd and having our sheep and raising those sheep holistically here on our homestead, especially since they are a critically endangered breed. And so I'm really excited about improving our pastures so that I can raise healthier sheep here on our homestead and focus on that. So I have the sheep and I have the goats, and then we do have a smaller flock of chickens. We have about 30 chickens right now, and of course we just hatched out some chicks, so I have 16 more chicks that hopefully will make it to adulthood. But those guys will actually replace all of our older ladies that we have. We have some hens that are 4 and almost 5 years old now, so those guys are going to replace them eventually later this year. But I'm very keen this year on focusing on my pasture management and rotational grazing practices, and I do really want to focus on that regenerative aspect, giving each section, each paddock time to rest. So between that 90 and 120 days, that's going to be the goal and the sweet spot for us. And so hopefully adding in some more forage is going to help that. Now, another thing that we've done the past few years is where we have rolled out a couple bales of hay, and we did that again this year. We had a neighbor bring over an old bale that his horses wouldn't touch, which was perfect because we just needed to add organic matter onto our ground. But the awesome thing about that is it will reseed itself, and so that lovely orchard mix that's in that bale is what grass is going to pop up later this year. So I'm very excited to kind of see where we strategically placed that bale, how that grass will come back even better. You know, the biggest thing for us is when we moved onto our property, the grass did not grow. We had a monocrop grass that was just a few inches tall. I think Josh maybe mowed it twice before the winter time. And if you are not familiar with North Carolina or living in the South in general, is things grow very fast around here. And so the fact that we had grass that did not grow, that was huge. That meant that our soil was really lacking. Now, if you recently moved onto your property and you don't really have an idea of what your soil looks like, I would strongly suggest that you do a soil test first. It's usually free to do, or maybe $5 through your local extension office. We actually did it through a local farm service. It was only $5 for them to send the test out, and we got the results back, and it showed us that we really lacked nitrogen and potassium, which is why we started with chickens and having our chickens rotate first, because they put a lot of nitrate onto the ground, and by rotating them they were spreading that, but they were also scratching up that seed bank. So every year we've had a much better pasture than the year before, and I'm so excited. I think I've said this about 100 times now during this video, but I'm very, very excited to see how our pastures look this year. And it kind of, you know, February, March is that hard time of year where it feels nicer out. It's getting to be a little bit warmer, but everything is still dead. Nothing is green yet. And so I'm hoping that by having better pasture management this year, we will have a better looking winter next year, and I won't need to have my sheep and goats off of the pasture for as long as I did this year. I hope that this video inspires you to maybe take a deeper look at your pastures and your soil health and see what you can do to make a bigger difference. Maybe you check out permaculture and see what kind of practices you can take to really make the most out of your property. And I'll say it once, I'll say it again, there's so much you can do on a smaller space. Just a reminder, we only have 1.24 acres total, and our garden now takes up over 10,000 square feet of that, so almost a quarter of an acre, which means that I only have 1 acre to work with for our sheep and goats, and that's not counting the barn, that's not counting the driveway or anything else here on the property. So keep that in mind. You can do a lot with just a few amount of animals on your homestead. And if you want a little bit more encouragement, I have a video here that I'll list up above where we raised over 800 pounds of chicken on our homestead in 1 year. You can do a lot with just a little. Thanks for watching.